All right, cool. My name is Ben Chong. I'm a product manager on cloud storage. I have with me today Manvinder, who is responsible for our technology partners, and a special guest, Ralph, from Veritas. So today we'll talk about building cloud storage that spans on-prem to the cloud. I know we use the word hybrid here, and I know it means certain things to certain people, but just put that aside. So it's kind of like, hey, the zombies are coming, right? So the Zetabyte age is coming. The 44 Zetabyte number is probably familiar to some of you. I think Cisco commissioned a study a few years ago where they forecasted about 44 zettabytes by 2020. So we have a new number today, is 180 zettabytes by 2025. So the question really is like, how can we manage storage, right? How can we hold that much data? Can we manage and store the data in the traditional way in your data center? Even with compression, deduplication, and so on, we are still talking about a lot of data. All right, so the question then is like, okay, if we want to use it, store this data in the traditional way, do we go on a spending spree and buy all the storage hardware we can get? If that's your plan, let me know and I buy shares in HP and Dell and so on. So why not leverage cloud storage, right? Essentially, when you leverage cloud storage, Google will take on the onus of dealing with capital costs. We will deal with the operations and all that. So essentially, you are able to store more data more quickly, right? So you are essentially, when your amount of your corpus of data increases, if you want to handle and manage that all by yourself, you're basically racing against that increase. So Google, we can do that much better than you because we kind of leverage it across all our different customers, across internal usage and so on. Going hybrid also helps reduce complexity because as you buy more hardware, you're talking about multiple platforms, different vendors, different software, and all that. Whereas with cloud, essentially, with Google, for example, it's one single platform, a single set of APIs, single set of tools, a single vendor to yell at, right? Essentially. And this is a pitch, right, for Google Cloud Storage. I think the keywords there are robust, seamless, and also simplicity and low cost. Okay. Well, I forgot. Let's save questions to the end. We have lots of slides, so that will help us get through things. And this is our storage portfolio. We have basically 2 storage tiers or classes for live or frequently accessed data, and 2 storage classes for infrequently accessed or cold data. So there's multi-regional, regional. Multi-regional essentially means that we are going to store the data across multiple data centers in continental locations, whether US, EMEA, or APAC. Regional would mean that you would store the data in a set of data centers that are in the East Coast US or West Coast and so on. And depending on your use cases, how frequently you want to access the data, whether your consumers are continent-wide or regional, you may want to store the data differently, right? Multi-regional versus regional. And then also, depending on your frequency of access, you can decide to store it under Nearline or in coldline. More details here, when we talk about pricing and so on. I think the key things to note here is the redundancy, right? When we talk about geo-redundancy. So multi-regional, we're talking about more than 2 regions or more, separated by at least 100 miles apart. Regional, nearline, coldline, kind of within the region. There's performance as well, which is interesting, right? So we talk about first byte read latency, right? So that's very different from a lot of our competitors, where the coldest tier of storage has an access penalty, right? Where if you want to access the data, you have to wait 3 to 5 hours. I think that's fine if you're used to retrieving data from tape, but for a lot of use cases, you want to get the data as quickly as possible because you don't want to do a request and then wait. Right, so the data is available like within milliseconds. It's essentially the same platform technically, So you don't have to kind of like worry that, okay, I've stored my data in cold tier, and therefore I have to wait hours, and I cannot achieve the performance that I need to get the data as quickly as possible. The other thing that is very unique to us is a consistent API. So across the different tiers is essentially one API, single set of tooling. If you're writing your own tools, you don't have to worry about, oh, my data is in coldline, I need to access it differently versus everything else. Here's a slide about our storage location. So our data centers, the square boxes are where we have data centers today. The blue boxes are where we are planning to open data centers, right? So in multiple regions, increasing number of regions. So we know, for example, customers may want to keep their data within a geolocality or within a region or a country for whatever reason. So we're opening more of these mini data centers. The yellow dots are our points of presence. So this is basically measuring the distance between where you are, your data center, your company, to the nearest points of presence. So that kind of reduces data latency. And that's very unique to Google because we have a lot more points of presence than competitors, a lot more network. Here we basically highlight the different kind of multi-regional buckets, so US, EU, and Asia. All right. Here we want to highlight that the cost of cloud storage is always going down, right? We kind of highlight that from 2011, right, when it was like slightly less than $0.175 dollars, I believe. Now it's all the way to the lowest here is 0.7 cents a gigabyte month. And as we optimize the infrastructure, we'll pass on the cost savings to our customers. All right, so question, how do I start using cloud storage in hybrid? So I'm going to hand over to Manvinder, who will go into a lot of the details.
Can you guys hear me? Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So now this session is about hybrid storage scenarios. But as Ben was talking about our product portfolio, I just noticed that all of our products are in the cloud. Ben and I don't talk that often, so that's why I just noticed that. But the point is, that is why it's so critical for us to work with partners who either manage data on-prem or help move that data between on-prem and the cloud. And as we go through the slides, I'll talk about some of these partners and how they can help us solve these use cases. All right, so what are these hybrid scenarios? So we thought we will pick 3 of the most common scenarios, or 3 very common scenarios that we see our customers asking us about, and walk through some of the challenges they're facing, how we're solving them, what partners are helping solve those, and we'll just go into details of those. So the first one is what we're calling bursting, but there are lots of different names. But essentially, the idea is you have your storage on-prem, your data, which has a lot of gravity, is sitting on-prem, but you want to use the cloud for compute, right? With transient compute, cyclical compute jobs, batch jobs, any bursty kind of workloads. So we'll talk about that. The second is your classical set of use cases around backup and disaster recovery and application continuity and those kind of things. So we'll talk about those. In today's session, we'll go deep into backup and we'll talk about different trade-offs and those things. And then finally, we were hearing more and more of our customers want to actively archive their primary storage to the cloud, expand the storage that they have, and save money in the process. So they want to use cold tiering to the cloud. So we'll talk about that. All right, so bursting. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of customers who, for various reasons, want to keep the data on-prem, whether that's compliance reasons, it's internal company policies, but it's really cost-effective to leverage compute in the cloud, and especially high-performance compute jobs. Example would be a hedge fund that has a lot of transaction data, but they want to run Monte Carlo simulations in the cloud, understand their risk profile, and that's a classical use case of when you could burst your compute into the cloud. We also see a lot of M&E studios doing rendering, transcoding, those kind of compute jobs in the cloud. So the key thing here is how do you move that data close to the compute instance in the cloud and move it to wherever you want after that. And we work with partners in those cases. A great example of a top partner for us is a company called Avir. Uh, so what Avir does is they provide their virtual appliance, the Avir VFXT, that can run in a Google Compute instance. And the customer that has data on-prem in a NAS or an object storage, you can cache that data in the cloud, run your compute in the cloud. That is obviously very common, but we're also seeing a lot of customers that want to move that data into Google Cloud Storage and an object storage in the cloud. And Avir has a physical appliance that basically is a gateway that can do that. So that's essentially cloud bursting. And from the cloud perspective, we also call it reach back to on-premise, right? So you're basically reaching back to the data that's on-premise. All right, so moving forward, so backup and backup to the cloud, right? So the backup to the cloud has been around for many, many, many years, and it's been talked about a lot. Yet not all the data is backed up in the cloud, and there are good reasons for that. But we are seeing an acceleration in that, and we believe that it's going to accelerate even more. And there are several reasons for this. Number one, Ben talked in detail about data growth, and there's just so much data that needs to be backed up now, and you need limitless amounts of capacity for that. Fixed budgets. So you have you're basically trying to do the backup without increasing the budget. So you're trying to do more with less, right, all the time. And then progressive CIOs want the IT priorities to be aligned with what the company outcomes are, right? The company goals are, and managing tape is not super high in priority always. And then obviously security and compliance. Even for your secondary storage data, you want your data to be secure, you want it to be compliant, and cloud provides a way for that. And so if not cloud, the other options are obviously tape and disk, and let me just quickly touch upon those. Tape is obviously inexpensive, it's very widely used, it's used very often for long-term backups, but it comes with its own set of challenges. So it is slow, it's often stored off-site, right? I'm preaching to the choir here for sure. But it is slow, it is stored off-site, it can take several hours for you to restore or several days for you to restore. And then it's manual. We had a customer which had 10 plus petabytes of data that was basically backups that they had done over the years. And they wanted to know how they can move that to the cloud. The big challenge was based on the resourcing they had done the math, and it would have taken several months for somebody to just read those tapes, right? So it becomes a challenge if it's a manual process. And then whenever you have lots of manual steps, the Murphy's law comes into effect, and it's always error-prone. And then disk is less manual, right? It's relatively easier to manage, but it is expensive. It's not meant for long-term durable storage, and it doesn't scale that well. So that is why we believe in backup to the cloud, and we obviously have a vested interest, but we believe that cloud comes with its advantages. For example, reliability. As Ben said, Google Cloud Storage, all the storage classes come with 11 nines of durability, so you don't have to worry about your data, losing your data. High availability. Your cloud storage almost never goes down, at least for Google. And security, right? So you can encrypt your data, you can manage access control, and you can get all the benefits of what Google is investing in making, investing in security and making sure we have all the right safeguards in place. But it often comes down to cost, and our customer engineering team has developed essentially a backup calculator that can, based on your scenario, based on your trade-offs, do the math and then sort of indicate whether or not cloud is a good option, because you have to look at several costs, including upfront capex, capital outlay costs, the personal costs, the recovery costs, and then there are advantages to each storage media. All right. So how does backup work? What is the deployment architecture? And then these are two of the most common models we've seen with our customers. The first one, I guess you can call it the direct model. You're using a backup software, whether it's Veritas, Net Backup, or something else, and you can use the built-in integrations to back up the data directly to the cloud, and we'll talk about that in more detail. And the other model is you can essentially use a storage gateway. which you can point your backup software to, and then you can use that storage gateway to move that data to the cloud. And we see that as a common model as well. That's very helpful if your backup software doesn't integrate with the cloud for whatever reason, then you can always use a gateway. All right, so to talk more about using your backup software and the integration, let me hand over the mic to Ralph from Veritas, and let's hear from the experts.
All right, can you guys hear me over there? All right, unfortunately, I don't have the mic, so you weren't going to get the data dance that I had planned on doing today, so I apologize for that. So for me, first of all, Ralph Wynn, I'm a principal product manager for NetBackup, responsible for our cloud vision and strategy. And when I tell my kids what I do, I said, well, you know, I help customers use the cloud more efficiently. And so like, sometimes they give me that look, and they're just like, okay. Well, I showed them the presentation that I was doing for Google, and they're like, oh, okay, so you're going to help Google protect their data? I'm like, no. I'm going to help customers use their data and put their data in Google so it's made heavily available. And he goes, my youngest, he goes, what does that mean? I said, well, basically, it's like YouTube. You can use YouTube on any device. Well, you're going to have your data available across the world from an enterprise perspective. And he goes, okay, cool. So if he understood that, then hopefully you guys are going to understand that as well. And so for us, from a Veritas perspective, we have 3 distinct use cases that we always talk about, and especially when I'm talking about the cloud. There's actually 4, but I'm going to talk about 3. When customers are looking at how do I really start to utilize the cloud and my infrastructure, we really start off with storage. And for us, it's all about how do we give customers the ability to take their toe and dip it in and start to move some of their data into the cloud. And so for us, we adopted cloud connectors for Google to give you the ability to use both of those cold and nearline storage tiers that my vendor shared and Ben shared, because that's really what customers wanted us to really start doing. It's easy for them to adopt. And then next thing, the question is, okay, now that I've got my data up there, well, I want to start running some more of my workloads. Well, we have the capability now, which was part of the announcement, is that we certified Google Cloud to run that backup. So that means you can go out and pick an instance type that you want, utilize the operating system that we support for NetBackup, and easily roll out a NetBackup server. Now, of course, the next question is, so when is NetBackup going to be in the launcher? Well, we're working on that. We're actually going to have that available here shortly so that you can actually roll out NetBackup from the marketplace within the matter of a few minutes in any region you want. And then number 3 is, how do I use the cloud or utilize these cloud gateways to help me really move that data up a little quicker? Because what I've heard from customers of all shapes and sizes is that we have petabytes of data that we want to move to the cloud, but we don't have the bandwidth to handle that. And so the cloud gateway is definitely a great option for those customers because they can break their streams up into multiple different segments and send data up to the cloud in a frequency that matches their bandwidth and also their SLAs. And so for us, this is really the way that we see, working with Google to give you guys, especially if you're looking at how do I really jump into the cloud, these are the options that are out there. Now, as far as how do I really get started with this, the goal for us from a NetBackup perspective is don't take you out of the user experience that you're used to. You're used to creating backup jobs inside of NetBackup. You're used to creating storage devices, and if you're not a NetBackup customer, shame on you guys. It's the best product out there. It rocks. It takes care of everybody's data. Of course, I have to say that because this is my product. But when we looked at how do we incorporate cloud storage into NetBackup, it was all about the user experience. And so what you're seeing are just a couple of examples of, from the UI, you basically say, I want to add cloud storage. You're going to find Google, and you're going to pick your tier. And then from there, you're going to specify your credentials. Simple as that. We go up, make the connection for you. We're already optimized to send data based off of the parameters that we worked with Google to not only break up our data into the right chunks, but also the compression and encryption capabilities that we know that you guys need for this type of data. And so it's a super easy configuration. Most of our customers love the fact that they don't have to go outside of NetBackup to incorporate Google's cloud storage capabilities. And now, with our partnership, it's not only just about data protection, but it's also about giving you the full 360 data management access to your data. So hopefully you've heard about our 360 data management platform that we're working to here at Veritas. the value that this really brings you, especially from a Google perspective, is you're going to get that insight. You're not only going to know exactly what data do I want to send to the cloud versus the data that may not even be cloud ready or may be data that shouldn't be in the cloud, such as the company picnic pictures from 2016 that really don't need to be in the cloud. So have that insight to that data, and then be able to have the capabilities to use cloud as a DR target. Those are other areas that we're working with Google, with other products in our portfolio, as well as having the ability to do copy data management. And so that is all about giving you the true end-to-end capabilities with data, giving you the insight and be able to move that data into the cloud tier that you want, be able to use that data for other analytics that you may have, and then also use the cloud as a recovery target. So I'll turn it back over to Manvinder.
Thanks, Ralph. So we were worried about Ralph jumping around the stage so much, so we didn't give him a lapel. We gave him the mic on the stage. So the key takeaway here is you could use the best softwares out there, the softwares that you already use, to keep you and start backing up to the cloud. Another key takeaway is we're seeing our customers back up from all kinds of sources, all kinds of applications and servers to the cloud. Another example of a partner, Cloudberry Lab, their software allows customers to back up your SQL, your Exchange servers, your device endpoints. So if you have a Mac or a Windows machine, you can back that up. You can even back up SaaS applications, so G Suite or Office 365. So diverse sources here. And before I wrap up on backup, one interesting use case we're seeing is a lot of our customers are running mission-critical applications in the cloud. Often behind those applications, they're running NoSQL, scalable databases like Cassandra and Mongo. And then we're seeing them use backup software. One of our partners, DDoS.io, they're using the software to back up to Google Cloud Storage. All right. So moving on from backup, and let's talk about tiering or active archiving or cold tiering to the cloud. And as I mentioned, creating tiered storages is not sort of new. You typically have a highly performant active storage tier. You may have a less active storage tier that's slightly cheaper. And then you may have some archival storage tiers, an online one, an offline one. And we believe that as you go from left to right in this picture, cloud becomes a very viable option for actively archiving your data. But how do you do it? So a couple of ways, right? So you could either use an on-premise storage platform that has this functionality built in. An example is Cloudian, which provides on-prem object storage. And then they can tier this data to the cloud based on policies, yet at the same time maintain the metadata on-premise and provide a global namespace. So that's one way to do it. There are many of our partners have this functionality, whether using, I think EMC is here in another session. If you're using something like Quantum or one of the other object storage or NAS platforms, tiering is often an inbuilt functionality. But you could also use a gateway to do that tiering. And let me talk about Komprise, which does that but more. So Komprise is an analytics-driven data management platform that basically, in a few minutes, you can get full visibility into all your on-prem storage, and you can understand, based on policies, how much ROI would it give you if you move those data to the cloud. And it can move that data to the cloud without disrupting your existing workflows. I'm going to hand it over to Ben, but before I do that, if you're interested in Komprise, I believe they're doing a free assessment for Google customers to understand what kind of ROI it can result in. All right.
All right, thanks. All right, so this conclusion. All right, so question then is that what and when to move, so you can see the kind of criteria, right? To move data to the cloud. Kind of data that's older than 30 days, so data that's less frequently used. Data that's in like branch offices that you may want to kind of like move to your own central data centers. Now, since this data is already going over the network, why not move that to the cloud? Secondary copies. So cloud is very popular for secondary backups, right? So you may have a primary backup somewhere, but a lot of times you want a secondary backups somewhere else, right, in a different location, managed by different people. So cloud is a very good destination for that. Tape replacement, we have talked about that. So depending on the kind of data, tape replacement may make a lot of sense. And one of the things that we didn't quite mention is, like, there are companies whose secondary value, right? They have a primary product, but the secondary value is the IP, right? So once you want to protect your IP, you need to access your archives and all that on a very frequent basis. So rather than keeping this data on tape with Iron Mountain, and then when you want to retrieve for discovery, you need to pay them a lot of money, and there's a lot of lead time. Why not put all this data in the cloud, where it's like faster to access, faster to pull out, faster to get recovery, and then you get really good value out of the data. And that goes to data with locked up value. Also, data supporting what we call business continuity or data recovery. So a lot of this data is better in the cloud, because one of the things also, right, we talk about replication. We do all of that for you. We have had sessions elsewhere where customers would ask us for, I need to worry about where I should store the data, right, geographically. Well, guess what? We kind of take care of that for you. Whether you choose multi-regional or regional, coldline or nearline, that's kind of like implicit, as opposed to like having your IT people like think through all that stuff and kind of worry that, I'm not replicating my data correctly. So when to do all this stuff is like, typical catalyst events, right, where your equipment is going, obsolescence, where you need to do structural upgrades, or where you have a new CIO that says, hey, we need to go to cloud first. Okay, that's a good way to get on cloud, because backups, you move to cloud storage, it's safe, there's low risk, and you can always say that, hey, we are cloud ready, right? All right, so summary. So essentially what we're trying to say here is that there's a whole ecosystem of partners to support you guys when you want to kind of like do these different scenarios, right? Whether you're doing bursting, backup, or tiering. And then what's next for you? So talk to your rep, right? Your Google reps about upcoming solutions. So their roadmap in place that we cannot kind of disclose without NDA, so talk to your reps. Contact us for a tape versus cloud calculator, so we'll talk about pricing there. Like Meminda was pointing out, try the Komprise free assessment. And then importantly, go downstairs, visit our partners at the expo. So all of them are there. Go and talk to them about how they can help you guys do hybrid and tiering to cloud storage. So related session, I think there's a big large-scale data ingest session tomorrow, Friday. That's my session. Yeah. And then if you guys have missed, there was an earlier session that talked about cloud storage. But the content should be available online. I think it's going to be on YouTube after this, so you guys can kind of like look at that and dig deeper into cloud storage, what that means for you, and so on.